Women or both. I thought the whole juxtaposition was interesting. You know, all the influencer executives were women, all the investment executives are men. Not 100% true. I heard a great line. By the way, contrary to I'm Mike Vorhaus, by the way, from Frank Magid Associates. Contrary to popular belief, the moderators actually don't pretty much pick the panels, right, guys? Mostly, in this case, Victor does, and at other conferences, you know, the sponsorships do. So there's always a belief that the moderator picks the panel, which is not usually true. Usually picked more because somebody's kind of moderator-oriented or, you know, supposedly good at it or something like that. But so what I'm about to say, I don't want it to be as hypocritical as it's going to sound, but I recently heard a phrase, no women, no panel, which I think is a reasonable comment. I mean, you got 5, 6 people on a panel, whatever it is in digital media. You can't find a single woman or 2 women to be on a panel. So, okay, there's my liberal. What's that liberal? There's my feminist point of view. Okay, this should be interesting despite the fact that we'll have a complete lack of diversity of opinion. Because all white men, sorry, Singh, I'm not sure, yeah. Going to be, you know, white men and subcontinent think the same way, so hopefully we will get some good diversity. I have a feeling, and these audience sizes kind of range here at Digital Hollywood on this topic, but I have a feeling that this has been like, I mean, I know for me personally it's true, a really busy time for investors, strategic investors, corporate investors, you know, investors from China coming over here. Seems like there's more angels. It seems like earlier stage funds are becoming slightly later stage now. I mean, it just seems like a lot of excitement in the investment world. So I thought a good way for us to talk. Everybody's given me questions, which I appreciate, and I find in general, and on this topic in particular, a pretty strong interest in questions from the audience. I know that there's almost always people who want to know how to reach you and how to bring something to your attention, and in most cases, I think most of you are anxious to see what people would send you. So why don't we start with a short introduction of yourself and maybe a little bit about, from an investment angle, what you're looking for and how for people to reach out to you. And then we'll go through some of the questions that you all provided, and we'll take questions from the audience. Does that sound pretty good? You're up.
All right. My name's Paul Hansen. I'm the CEO of a production and financing company called Covert Media. I've worked in the industry for about 20 years, mostly in independent production and financing and distribution. Prior to that, I worked in investment banking, mostly mergers and acquisitions of media and software companies.
Can you just add one sentence onto that about what you do or don't do that would look like a normal VC? Are you only doing specific content, like this script?
We have, well, everything is changing now, as I'm sure everyone would expect, but our historical sort of bread and butter financing model was was sort of the quintessential larger independent structure where we pre-sold international. We would use a leveraged financing structure where we were using senior debt collateralized by the international pre-sales, tax credits, soft money, other incentives, and then the remaining piece would be equity that we either funded ourselves through our backers or we syndicated with other investors. But I would say today, you know, that is an increasingly difficult model to implement. So we're finding ourselves doing things a lot differently. Sometimes we'll do a lower budget film for all equity, or we're finding ourselves flipping distribution rights to worldwide players like a Netflix or even a studio on occasion, where we don't think we can affect a logical split right structure.
And almost always content, almost never
almost
a
always
classic startup.
Correct. The private equity fund that backs us has made more traditional, what I would characterize as like VC, PE investments into companies, but we as a business in and of ourselves don't really do that. Our capital deployment is almost universally directed towards content projects.
Is that funder a public name that you can state?
Yeah, it's called Media Content Capital. They're an LA-based PE fund, but we're the only content play in their portfolio.
Got it. Okay. I feel like we're on, well, I mean, I look like James Corden except for the hair. But I feel like we're on a TV show because hold your book up, Graham.
There we go.
So Graham has a book out.
Sky.
Hold it up.
Graham.
Scott.
Who's Graham?
I'm sorry.
Sky.
Oh, Scott. So I apologize.
Sky.
Hold your book
Sky.
up.
Let's go. Sky.
Hold it up. You
All right.
brought it. Hold it up.
All right, there's my book. So, product play. Now, here, I'm Skylar Moore. I'm a partner at Greenberg Glusker. I had the corporate finance, entertainment, whatever department. I have if you're looking, you need to look me up. I have a Forbes column that regularly published, so you can find me online. I've got a YouTube channel under my name, Sky Moore. I have I teach at the USC Law School, and I have the product placement portion of the program. Thank you for the setup. Is I have a book called The Biz that is now on its 5th edition. You'll find it on Amazon. But don't get the 4th edition. The 5th is coming out like any day now. So if you are interested, it's a very popular book in its 5th edition. And that's what I do. What I do is represent financiers in the industry. I do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but a lot of financing of all different kind of content. So my clients are just span the globe from short form digital TV, Netflix product to full theatrical films.
Excellent. Okay.
So, so I'm Greg Bedrosian. I'm a managing partner and CEO of Drakestar Partners. You can find more about me at drakestar.com down the road. We are an investment bank and private equity co-investor exclusively focused on the tech, media, and communications sector. So we do a blend of advising big corporates like the big studios through to the big telcos and internet companies on both M&A and corporate finance. We also work with a lot of the up-and-coming, fast-growing businesses, either as investment banking advisor, or we also have a pool of co-investment capital, which is a bunch of very, very large family offices that will not lead a deal, but be a co-investor alongside a deal, and that's anywhere between $25 and $100 million equity checks alongside some of the bigger guys. I'm based in our firm's New York office. We have 10 offices around the world. I get to LA a lot. It's great to be here today. A lot of what we do also, given our geographic reach, is cross-border transactions, which happy to talk about later during the panel.
What borders? No, seriously. I mean, are you an Asian expert or you're more?
Yeah. So most of our offices are in the U.S. and Europe, and we're increasingly transacting in the Asia Pacific region.
Great. Is it Vinay? Is that the right
It is, yeah,
pronunciation?
exactly. I'm Vinay Singh. I'm a partner at a company called Archer Gray, also New York-based. And we essentially have kind of two sides of the business. We're early-stage venture investors, and we're content financiers and producers. On the venture side, early-stage, seed and Series A, tech companies in the media space. A few examples: Little Star, VR distribution company; ShareGrid, peer-to-peer marketplace for production equipment, things like that. On the content side, we do a lot. We're probably best known for feature films, and just maybe kind of to the extent it's relevant for the content component of this panel, it's like, right now we have a movie kind of put together in traditional indie financing way through pre-sales and debt and equity that's shooting in Israel. We have a movie set up with Netflix, if that's the new model. We have a movie that'll come out in a little bit through Fox Searchlight, funded by a studio. So we're kind of, I think as many producers and financiers are, kind of trying to adapt to the changing world in which movies are coming together. But we also do documentaries, digital content. Historically, we've done theater. Not doing that this year, but we touch a few different formats. You wanted us to talk about how people should reach us. I mean, my email address is Vinay@ArcherGray, but I would say the best way, for all things, whether you're submitting a film or submitting a pitch deck for a venture firm, is to come through the network. I don't think that's surprising to anybody. So, but we'll take looks at things that come from various different places.
Great.
Hi, I'm Graham Brown. I'm a partner at Lair Hippo Ventures. We are a traditional venture capital firm. We're based in New York. We invest around the country. We're most active in the New York market, but we have about 20 or so investments here in LA. And we're looking to be sort of the go-to partner On the investing side, either first or one of the first institutional rounds for founders across a wide range of industries. So we invest in direct-to-consumer brands and e-commerce. We invest in enterprise technology. We invest in emerging tech. We invest in marketplaces, and we do quite a bit of future media as well. I'd say it accounts for about 10% of what we do in total. We're typically coming in at that seed stage, at the seed stage round. And the partners behind Lair Hippo really have sort of deep expertise within the media landscape. And so this is everything from sort of where the world's been going since around 2010. So early investors in founders of Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Group 9, sort of some of the larger enterprises, Refinery 29, to more recently companies on the production side like Crypt TV based here in LA. Brat is another more recent company focused on, or teen-focused, script-based production company, but scales entirely digitally. So we're sort of actively involved within the LA market and sort of how we think about the future of content.
Okay. So let's try as much as possible to focus on content, since that was the significant portion of the title. Why don't we go ahead and just stay down there with Graham? So give us a sense of, when you're looking at a content play, what you're looking for. I'm suspecting you guys are looking at companies that do a group of content versus other people here are looking for specific scripts or IP. So give us a sense of, of what type of content you're looking at, and kind of how you differentiate content versus a company versus one script.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking for scalable, repeatable models. We obviously know that every company we invest in won't be $1 billion outcome, but we sort of look at our upside, and that's how we're framing our initial investment decision. And so we look at, I'll give a few recent examples. I think we're looking for, founders with a really strong brand sense and a model that can scale, particularly against these sort of incumbent traditional models. And so we're looking for, on the production side, something that's lower cost but still high quality, and producing sort of original IP that we can, think about franchising and serializing out. And then on the distribution side, we're looking at how do we reach a larger audience more quickly, more cheaply, and build community online. And so, a lot of our businesses, they're telling stories across the giant media channels such as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. We're even seeing, companies across Snapchat and Twitch as well. These are really all great platforms to tell a story and reach an audience of millions and even billions at a much lower cost. And so, an example, sort of Crypt TV, which that business model is a little bit like Marvel for monsters. And so you're creating IP around monsters and horror themes in a way online that you can do very cheaply, reach a broad audience that is very enthusiast based, and then sort of serialize the things that are working, that the data is showing you is repeatable and scalable. And so with that company, they now have, I believe, 7 million Facebook fans, close to 1 million subscribers on YouTube. When they roll out a new film, they're going to get tens of millions of views very rapidly, and they're going to be able to iterate on that and sort of build out themes and IP that can be then turned into things down the road for, larger production scale, licensing around Halloween and other things that sort of the model lends itself to being, very repeatable, and also this ability to scale cheaply and reach a really broad audience and build a community. And so that's sort of an example that we think about. It's very vertically focused. It's original content. It's building long-term IP, and it's doing it in a new model versus your traditional studio model.
Excellent. Danae, you want to give us a bit of an understanding of how you guys approach content, whether it's individual projects or companies?
Sure. Well, I'll maybe just dovetail off of that. And you said it a few times about kind of finding scalable, repeatable content models. Inherently, content doesn't scale. And so, for us, the initial reaction, we're a little different, have slightly different risk appetite for it than Lair Hippo. But if we get pitched, and I'm wearing my venture hat now, if we're getting pitched a startup that, is built around content, or even if it is a kind of platform play, or something that looks more like a software platform play, but it needs kind of content in the first years to jumpstart it, our kind of initial inherent reaction is no. And so if there are people in this audience that are trying to think about going beyond just I want to kind of make a single piece of content over and over again, but rather kind of link that together into something that looks like Crypt TV, or looks like Me Too, or looks like Drama Fever, or whatever the other kind of successful VC-backed companies are. I think you do have to think about how does this scale? Why is this a business that kind of deserves venture money and is going to scale in a venture way versus a studio? You can also make people build studios. You can do that too, but I think you have to be honest with yourself about, is this a studio that's just very good at making a certain type of content, but it doesn't really scale up like a venture-backed company, or is it something that's Crypt or Drama Fever or whatever? So on the venture side, if somebody comes to us with something that is content-centric, that's the question we're asking. And 99 times out of 100, I would say we've come out to passing on it because it doesn't tick those boxes. But we also hold it to a slightly higher standard because we have our own content arm. Just so from a diversification standpoint, we really have to think about, does it fit some gap that we couldn't fill ourselves with our content arm? How we evaluate projects on the content arm, that looks fairly traditional. We read scripts, we take pitches from creators, whether it be a digital creator, documentarian, filmmaker, EP on a TV show, and we decide if we like it. We decide if it kind of adds something to our specific brand, and if we bring something as producers that somebody else couldn't bring. And then if we feel the answer is yes, we typically get involved in very early stage. We're development-focused producers, and we develop it and package it and take it out into the world.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, just to complement some of these, more venture-y models to give the full landscape. So a company that we work with on a number of different things reasonably closely are some of the units of Lionsgate. So there's a company folks in the audience probably have not heard of called Global Gate, but it's partly owned by Lionsgate, and it's got some great executives that had a lot of traditional studio experience but wanted to be more entrepreneurial and cut a deal with Lionsgate, which is a pretty entrepreneurial company, around building a business that's part owned by Lionsgate and part owned by outside investors, like some of the panelists here. None of them on the panel today are investors, but like them. And their focus is mid-sized and small budget international films. So what they'll do is they'll transport a successful French language film into the Spanish-speaking market. And how do they do that? So part of it was it a hit in France? But then if I'm rolling it out in Spanish-speaking markets, do I need to tweak the characters for cultural differences? Do I need, and then that's where they'll pull in some of the expertise from both the executives who are running it, who are very entrepreneurial, and then their strategic partner, Lionsgate, to say, who do we know who can be an actor? How can we pull some of that, and how can we edit the script? And then they'll fund it and go through a normal funding process and vetting process, green-light it, and proceed. So there are other ways of being entrepreneurial in a content sense versus just hanging up one shingle and hoping that the next script sells. The entrepreneurs that we're working with at Global Gate have taken a different path, and with its pluses and minuses in terms of how to scale, and so far so good. So just as another complement to some of the other panelists' views.
Great.
What company are you with?
Me?
Yeah.
Drake Star.
Okay. Are you looking at Global Gate? Are you?
Sorry?
I'm representing Global Gate, so I'm wondering.
Yeah.
You were looking at it?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well,
Yep.
glad to meet you.
Yeah.
I'm Scott, I'm the lawyer. It's a great company. I'm the lawyer for it.
Yeah.
So some themes that I've heard, which is interesting. Global Gate. I don't do the investing. I'm just the putz lawyer. But I'll tell you a few things that are going on, and you'll just see the trends in the industry. Global Gate being one, which is it's local language production, and it's moving out of the U.S. because they see opportunities around the world to do exactly what the gentleman described, which is taking a film that worked in one location and taking it to another. But interesting, not bringing it to the U.S., just going to another local market. So local language production is big. We recently sold a company called Gravitas that is a very interesting, it's a digital aggregator. It went to all the film markets and the festivals and picked up films for basically nothing and said that they would distribute it worldwide on all digital platforms, and became very successful, and was sold to a company called ProSieben, which is also aggregating, market. But if you look at it, what's interesting is it's completely bypasses theatrical. It bypasses DVD. It just goes directly to the digital market. Another company we're selling right now is Special Effects Company, and it Pixiemondo. I don't know if you guys, if anyone was a bidder on that, but Pixiemondo is being sold, and it does high-end special effects and now getting into VR. And so what you'll see now is, and I'm a big proponent of VR. My last 3, quote, movie experiences, instead of going to a movie, I went out and did VR. And it was a much more fun experience because I went with my wife, and you get to do it together and you participate. And I'll tell you, VR is the future, like by miles and miles. It's just going to completely replace the theatrical experience. And then the last, my last 3 films were sold to Netflix, and they started off as theatrical films and then kind of veered right and ended up in Netflix land, including one of the biggest ones, which was The Irishman, which is Martin Scorsese and is an enormous budget, and where it was going to go out, which is just an interesting change in the world. It was going to go out through Paramount US theatrically. It was going to go through STX, being sold to foreign. Absolute classic pre-sale model, what you'd expect for a huge budget film with Martin Scorsese. Right turn, and it's now at Netflix. And so that that's a brand new world.
And why is that?
Theatrical is dying. The theatrical world is over. I just believe it's dead. I believe that if you look at the numbers, the attendance population is going up and attendance has been going down steadily. They're trying to make up for it by price increases, which is unsupportable when you have all the access to content you want online. Adults aren't going to the theaters. Kids aren't going to the theaters. I think theatrical is dead. I think within 3 years the theaters are going to convert to VR experience and get either high end. You're either going to have a high end Star Wars experience with seats that move and sound and kind of what they call 4D seats and 3D sound. They're going to go that way, or they're going to convert to a VR experience. And there's 2 platforms. One is where you're kind of, you wear the goggles, and another is where you walk through. It's an interactive, and you like the Void. If anyone's experienced the Void, is an amazing experience. But
I'm just curious. Who knows what Skylar's talking about? The Void. Okay,
Yeah.
Disney, Star Trek, Troopers, VR experience, about 15 minutes, $30.
Yeah.
And it's located right outside of Disney.
Yeah, and they've got one in New York, and they
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they've got one in New York.
How many of you have used it?
I've been there, I've done it. It's
Anybody
ama-
think it was great? Keep your hand up.
Oh God,
Yeah, I thought it was great too.
it's unbelievable. VR is just such an immersive, incredible experience. It just completely blows away the theatrical experience when you a good VR experience. At home doesn't really work because you get motion sickness and you can't really walk around and you fall over but the location-based VR is absolutely the future. Is going to absolutely replace the theatrical experience in time. So you
Are
see
you
all
a fan of Nolan Bushnell's initiative in that regard? Then?
I don't know it.
He's doing you know who Nolan Bushnell is, one of the early creators of the video game industry.
Yes, yeah.
So he's doing an out-of-home. Basically, they're planning to take over paintball facilities, that sort of thing, and turn it into VR, kind of like Shakey's Pizza Parlor pinball,
Great,
but it'll
great.
be VR toys. It'll
Yeah.
be VR activities.
And by the way, China is way ahead of us on this. It's unbelievable. China has like 1,000 VR centers already throughout China. It's just way or more than that. So they, just a heads up, they're way ahead of us on this.
Any evidence of Western creators going over to China?
Yeah, I have on the China, just a footnote on China, China tap going to Hollywood is completely shut down. It's just been shut down since January of last year because of currency restrictions. But money in China is huge, and I've got clients that have just gone there and based there, and they're producing there and directing there. And absolutely, and China could care less about the U.S. market. Their films are working enough in China; they just don't care. And so, yeah, and that they love Hollywood expertise. So, you know, go east, young man. There's huge opportunities in China.
Well, now you're building on something I do at a lot of conferences. Who here has been to China? Again, you guys are so ahead of the average audience. I mean, even at VidCon last year, it was not, that was 3/4, so that's great. I'll just take this a step further. Who's been there more than once? Okay, good. All of you should go. It's no more expensive than going to Europe. Seriously, right? This is the other direction.
Yeah.
And you can stay at the Park Hyatt in Beijing for nothing.
Well,
for $200.
avoid the smog.
Well, the smogs, you know, those of us who are old enough in
Go
LA.
to Shanghai, yeah.
do better. Other things in Asia that you're excited about?
Yeah, China. Look, China's within China. It's astounding what's happening. Whenever you're dealing with a Chinese company, their first question is, how are you going to get the money out? And hopefully the answer is they're in Hong Kong. And if they're in Hong Kong, they can get the money out. Like the beauty of Tencent is they're Hong Kong based, and they can get money out. For example, there's a company being formed, Tang Media, and they now call it Global something. And that's funded by Tencent, and that because they have money outside of Hong Kong, outside of China. And then I've got an investor right now in a deal that's coming, that again is, so there's still some activity, but the real activity is what they really want us to buy is content for China and expertise, to use in China. That's
Great, very helpful. Paul, what do you want to talk about, like type of content you fund and how you fund it? And
Well, our bread and butter continues to be sort of just traditional feature content creation, whether we're the financier in the production company or we're just the foreign sales agent. But we've pursued buying libraries for international sales, as well as, in the emerging world, like everyone has been sort of hinting at, the sort of historically utilized financing structures are increasingly difficult to use, so we're finding ourselves doing things that are going straight to streaming or have some other path. And from our perspective, almost everything we put into our development pipeline, it almost becomes sort of a matrix, which is here's plan A, plan B, and plan C, in terms of here's sort of the target financing and distribution mechanism that we think this is going to be geared towards, because things change so fast that the plan A may no longer be feasible, or for one reason or another, we need to pivot to another approach. We do not really spend any time sort of kind of what the guys at the other end of the table do, which are looking at sort of smaller companies that are focused on more kind of bite-sized content. That's just, to be blunt, not our strength. We also view it as even more difficult to monetize, although if you take a shotgun approach and you take 50 swings at the plate, you might find one that breaks out. For us, in the area we focus, admittedly it's getting more challenging, but the ratio of how many bats at the plate you have to take before you get a hit is a little bit more rational, albeit we're deploying more capital each time.
And how many people in the audience are involved in a content project that they're seeking capital for, funding for? Okay, so let's go ahead and take some questions then from you all. Yeah, you're first. Go ahead. Stand up, say your name. You. Yes, you.
Hi, my name's Scott Kelly. I'm actually an investor in technology. So my question to the panel is that, obviously I have certain criteria in how I judge a pitch or a company. How does it differ in making content investments, media investments versus what I do on the technology side? That's over there.
By the way, why don't you give us one or two examples of what you mean by technology in the content world?
Yeah, I mean, I primarily invest in SaaS, Internet of Things, mobility. So anything from apps to software companies. That's where I like it. So obviously, in my realm of work, there's obviously a whole bunch of checkoffs that I have to do. I'm curious if there's anything different in investing in the entertainment side. I haven't done that yet, so I'd like to learn that piece of it.
Sure. I mean, I can take this. On the kind of one-off project side, on the content side, I mean, it starts, at least for us, somewhere very subjective, which is, do we like the story? Do we feel like, based on our collective experience as producers and what we see in the marketplace, that it's unique? The kind of nature of a world in which, Netflix alone is making 1,000 pieces of original content, all of which are probably going to clear a certain hurdle of being good. Companies like Crypt and all these other companies are making a lot of content fast that's available immediately on your phone and is distracting, I think in a good way, but distracting, your audiences in different places. Like, you have to figure out if your content's going to stand out. It's very hard to make unique stories anymore. So for us, it starts in a very subjective place, and then it goes, if we like it, it goes to a kind of much more objective place, which is, do we feel like the audience is easily reachable? Do we feel like the financiers that are currently active in the space, whether it be studios or independent financiers, will back something like this? And we kind of go to a feasibility study of sorts. And then if the answers are yes on both fronts, then we proceed. And in the 2 years it takes us to develop the project, the world changes 10 times usually, and we kind of have to keep reassessing the feasibility of it. And then we find like we feel like we've lined up the kind of creative and the business side of it. Then we take it out to market, either at the production stage or, if we get independent financing, then at the distribution stage, and try and set it up.
And have you funded companies that you feel are changing or breaking through in technology, or have you funded companies doing technology for production, or has it all been individual intellectual properties?
So we've done both, and there's a little bit of a wall between the two. Those are fairly distinct. So what I was just describing would be the process by which, we came to work on this movie, Can You Ever Forgive Me? It's going to come out in the fall with Melissa McCarthy through Fox Searchlight. That was the process I was describing. If you're asking the question of kind of, are we investing in technology that's helping move the way in which those movies get made forward? Yes, and we see a lot of pitches, I would say, companies that are trying to fix the production process, fix the sales process, fix all the kind of individual processes in the value chain of idea to movie on a screen, whether it's your phone or the theater. On that front, like I said, we're investors in a company called ShareGrid that I think, is addressing a real problem, which is the way in which we rent and procure equipment, whether you're a YouTuber or you're a studio, is highly antiquated and lives in a world of kind of something near faxing, and oftentimes faxing documents back and forth. And it looks like booking travel in the 80s where you call an agent and they say, well, I can get you on this flight for this much. And you're like, that feels high. What else can you? And you do this iterative process that's super inefficient. So, we got comfort around that company largely because we believe, an FS7 camera is an FS7 camera is an FS7 camera. It's a commodity. We've seen a lot of things that are marketplaces for people or marketplaces for the rights of films that can replace somebody going to Cannes this week and selling the movie at the Cannes market. We've been highly skeptical of those because there's a lot of nuance in selling rights. There's a lot of nuance in hiring your DP on your shoot. And there's also a lot of stakeholders who are going to hold fast to making sure their livelihoods don't disappear, for better or worse. So we have not invested, to the question, not invested in a lot of kind of tech that's disrupting what, William Morris does or CAA does. Because
Excellent.
For a variety of reasons.
Anybody else desirous of speaking to?
I would just say this. I mean, and I would guess everyone on this panel would probably agree that singular one-off investments in the content space are not a good idea. Whatever approach you take should definitely, in some facet, embody a portfolio theory. There's too much just exogenous risk and things that happen on a one-off project basis. No matter what point in the life cycle you're at, you could even have a completed film, but it snows heavily on the East Coast on your opening weekend, and it could blow your return. So it is definitely a good idea, if you are going to get involved in the investment side of the content space, to take a pretty wide portfolio approach.
Do you consider that to also be multiple platforms, same IP, but on 3, 4, 5, 6?
I don't think necessarily, and there are plenty of players that focus in sort of one specific niche within, the marketplace, like they're focusing in just, smaller short-form content for online distribution. There's some players that try and focus exclusively on theatrical content. My point is that it is such a long haul to go from concept through the development cycle to packaging, pre-production, principal photography, not to mention all the financing nonsense that happens in between, then to get actual exploitation across all media windows depending on what the content is. That is such a long road. So many things can go wrong. Obviously, when it goes right, it's spectacular. But if you look statistically at the population of data points in the content world, it's not particularly compelling. But if you know what you're doing and you have people who you're partnered with who do know what they're doing, you're our thesis is obviously over time and over a portfolio, you know, you can get a pretty attractive return, which fortunately we've been able to do.
Well, in my world, it's you know, obviously one of the criteria is the management or the team that's involved. So you mentioned, Vijay, is that do you look at the quality of the content first, or does that come before the quality of the team producing the quality content?
No, they're very much tied. And in that regard, kind of looking at a project at a very early stage looks a lot like looking at a company at a very early stage. You know, my partner has, you know, kind of a great line that I'll steal, which is a great director can take a mediocre script and make it a great project. A mediocre director cannot take a great script and make it into a great project. Or the likelihood of that happening is way less. So, yes, the team matters a lot.
Okay, in the back, all the way in the back, and then the woman in front of you next after you.
Hi. So I invented a mobile platform, but instead of coming at it from the tech direction, I came at it from having been a television writer, understanding content. I got 3 patents. I spent a lot of years and a lot of money getting 3 patents on this, and I'm finding that people don't react to patents as well as I thought they would. What is the thinking of investors on something that's unique, quickly scalable, agile, cost-effective, solves all the problems of mobile, and has patents?
You know, I missed that down all 5 times. Passes?
Patents.
Patent.
Patents.
Full utility. Does that have value to investors, or is it just kind of like, yeah, we need to take care of that when we decide to do it?
I feel like I've been speaking a lot, but I'll just say, no, I hold kind of a company that has gotten to the stage that you've gotten with patents in very high esteem. I mean, for us, it's a question of whether or not the business model around those patents fits into our fairly narrow thesis. So maybe you're running into that challenge, not knowing exactly what your business is. But yes, I do think it's valuable.
And just to pick up on that, I think what I've seen personally in my firm as the patents are valuable and it's impressive, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And I think many people, not commenting on yourself, but many people who come to us are patent forward and, oh, Greg, I've got 10 patents. And they're really, really articulate in explaining the patents and what the patents do and process, and not so strong in articulating the business model. And that's where people fall down. So the patent support, and it's a reinforcement of the walls around building that business model, but the business model has to be sound.
Yeah, and so coming from the early stage where we'll make 20 or so seed investments a year, we're sort of never making the decision based on a patent portfolio. It is part of the equation, but if we're to rank order the key things that are going to get us excited about an early stage investment, it's going to start with the team and the market opportunity, and then where that product is and how that model fits into that market. And clearly, like, real patents are going to fit within that sort of third point of the triangle and could be incredibly important, but it's not going to be the criteria that we make an investment decision upon.
What if somebody brought you technology that literally reduced the cost of production by 50%? Would all of you look at that? Would some of you look at that? Would none of you look at that?
Who wouldn't look at that?
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what that would be, but
Well, it'd be Avid meets AI.
okay.
People are building that, yeah.
Right.
But even that doesn't, I mean, the first thing I would say, I wouldn't believe that you could bring the production cost down 50%.
How far down do you think technology could bring production costs down, roughly?
20, 30%?
Yeah.
Because there's only certain parts of it that can be brought down.
That's right. It depends on the nature of the content. If it's a walk and talk movie, or a TV show or whatever, if you looked at the cost report or the budget for that content, and you broke it down between the human component and the sort of, for lack of a phrase, the technological software, basically the camera package, lighting, grip, electric, and post software, it's still way, way skewed towards humans. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you can come up with a technological solution that actually reduces, the human factor, which again I'm skeptical you could, then maybe you're talking about something, but it's not going to go away. What's that? Sure. Well, and visual effects. I mean, but so. That's the money is, but it costs money. Yeah. Yeah. But I think if you look at the sort of the cost trend pattern over, let's say, the last 20 years, for every step forward in sort of the scalability and cost side of visual effects work, you take a step back in terms of the sort of the cost of innovation, because it gets more sophisticated, fancier, more complex, and so the bar of what the audience expects goes up. I mean, if you go back and look at a movie from 25 years ago, it's sort of laughable. What
Go
the
back
visual,
and look at YouTube
Sure.
15 years ago.
but it was still compelling to an audience then, but from an audience standpoint today, they would not be compelled to go watch that in the theater. There's a sort of ever sort of Sisyphean paradigm that exists in the visual effects world.
You're all masochists because you're in a hard industry, which is content. Go ahead. Yes, stand up, please, and state your question.
Quick question. I'd like to see if you please mention this in part. Just curious, what came first, the car or the horse? In the sense that you said you were the project.
Sure.
Could you repeat that a little bit? Maybe I'm not the only
Yeah,
one.
I think the question was, I referenced a film in which, that we have, the stars Melissa McCarthy. At what point did she get involved? Was she kind of the linchpin that put the movie together, I'm guessing, is what you're asking? No, I mean, we have been developing that for many years, many years, from a memoir by the same name called Can You Ever Forgive Me, that my partner, head of production, read and loved and got involved when there was nothing else but the book and us. So she came much later in that process.
So you also the book, and then she put it together the project.
Yeah, exactly right.
Question right up here in the front.
Kind of to piggyback on that,
Let everybody hear you. Maybe just stand up. I should be like a high school teacher.
what's the budget for something like this that you guys are investing in?
Probably not something I can share publicly.
Okay, to piggyback off that, I was just curious, if you guys get involved at a later stage, if you do have talent attached, if you're working the script, do you guys take a look at that in terms of financing?
Sure. I mean, we look at stuff pretty much almost at every time in the timeline, I would say, prior to the commencement of photography, I would say. For us, every movie, we don't have a particular mission as it relates to genre, budget size, et cetera. We're pretty economic animals. Everything to us is what's the business thesis and how do we build a case for the deployment of our capital if we're being asked to put money into it. And so we've done $2 million genre films, we've done $20 million sci-fi, we've done even bigger films, but it all is built around the value proposition within it, which is always sort of this somewhat scientific, somewhat mystical combination of the creative, the elements, meaning the director, the producers, the cast, usually most importantly, the nature of what it would be, and what the likely financing and distribution path would be.
You said cast most importantly.
Yes.
So a substantial name makes a big difference in terms of a project.
Sure.
In your world.
Once you get above a certain budget threshold, absolutely. Or a certain director, I would say, could make up for that too. But yeah, you're not going to make a $50 million film with no recognizable name.
Yes?
So this question is much more specific for Greg Graham and Vinay. From a venture investing perspective, what does a successful exit look like?
Great question.
Money.
Money comes in a lot of ways and a lot of sizes. So what would you consider
Not R&B.
Yeah, well, so we're getting in really early. Usually when a company is still valued at $10 million or less. And so for us, a successful exit could be a $50 million exit or a $100 million exit. With the amount of risk we typically take, we hope that there's more upside than that. And if sort of everything falls into place, there's something that's a much higher potential, maybe $1 billion potential exit. But we're at sort of where we come in and how early we come in. If a business model is capital efficient enough, a $50 million or $100 million exit could be a great return.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would echo all of that. We're also early stage investors. We, just as a rubric, are looking for 7 to 10x returns, realizing that not every company will get to there, so that has to balance out. I think us personally, I'm really interested in capital efficient businesses that can, that don't have to become billion-dollar businesses because they don't have to raise money in the way that, not to pick on BuzzFeed, but the way in which a BuzzFeed had to raise money to get to the scale they are. I'm interested in companies that maybe can just raise just $50 million in their life cycle and get to a meaningful exit. Because I think it's hard to build billion-dollar media businesses anymore. I mean, there's exceptions, but it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on those points, and again, we have sort of two sides of the house at our firm. One is the co-investing side, which is a little bit more later stage than my colleagues on the panel here, and then there's the investment banking advisory side. And the point about within digital media, entertainment technology, which is a core area of where our firm and I focus, most successful exits are under $100 million. And if it's capital efficient, then everyone does well. If it's $100 million and a little bit of a mess on how everything was pulled together, everyone's unhappy. Yeah. So it's a little bit less the what's the headline and a little bit more kind of what went into the process. But also picking up on the earlier comment about will you fund something where it's almost done and you're just kind of putting the finishing touches. It's the same with from venture to private equity, whereas a venture person is looking at 7x, 8x, 9x. A later stage, like our co-investment partnerships are targeting 2 to 3 times our money. That's not because we're investing in bad deals, it's because we're investing in businesses that are more mature and we're paying up for that, for that existing risk mitigation.
And your hit ratios 2 to 1 or 1 to 3 versus a VC is 1 to 10, 1 to 7, 1 to 5. In terms of the numbers.
Yeah, much lower fail rate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was trying.
Yes,
you said that so much better than I did.
Yes.
You're a lawyer and you said it in less words than me. I think this is good at the way we're doing this because there's short questions and not everybody's answering, so we can get through a lot of questions today. Yes.
As a young creator who wants to
Wait, what qualifies as young?
19.
Okay, I agree.
He wants to who's started purchasing equipment and starting development for that sort of projects. When I get to a stage where I feel I have an idea that I'm really passionate about, I want to go to scale it up and meet with an investor like you guys. What steps would you say to prepare for? If you were you've done some unique creators, and also what things, what stage of the process do you think best to start meeting?
By the way, you know Spielberg's origin story, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And to clarify, you're talking about making films or videos or something like that. I guess I'll start with this one as well.
Good.
You're living in a great time where you can literally with your phone, make something amazing that's worthy of 1 million views or more. You're living in a tough time where you're competing with millions, if not billions, of people who are doing that simultaneously. So I think if you are trying to kind of graduate to the next level beyond kind of I make something and I put on Instagram or Snap or YouTube to I want to get institutional money from somebody like Paul or us or something else. You have to give those companies a reason to kind of want to invite you in and have a meeting with you, which means you probably have to make some of that stuff that you make for free and put it into the world, whether it's a film festival or onto YouTube or whatever, that garners attention and that brings some heat on you that people are going to want to meet you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think at the stage you're at, I don't think you're going to be able to walk into a room with a script and say, hey, make my project. I mean, there's a very remote chance that that's possible if the script were truly spectacular. I would say focus your time on honing your skills and proving you can do what you say you're going to do. So I think what he said is 100% right. Take advantage of the fact that you have some equipment and you have some wherewithal and go make something that's relatively inexpensive. And almost you could treat it as a proof of concept for what might be your larger project, or just show that you can make something and you can actually monetize it in the short term. If your ambitions immediately are sort of gravitate towards something bigger, then I think you need to find a partner or a mentor or someone who can help you along the way. You're probably not going to be able to do it yourself.
Great example was Matrix. The guys made it into a comic book. The studio proponent pushed them to make a comic book, and then they could get the top guys to agree to make the movie after they saw the comic book. And that's the story from a reliable source. Is that useful?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep, go ahead. Stand up, please. Let everybody hear your question.
Thank you. I'm curious, I didn't hear much about scripted series from you.
The pros and the cons, I would say, are, and they, as much as there are a lot of similarities, there are so many structural differences between episodic content and feature-length content. The most obvious is sort of the quantity. But in terms of the distribution pattern, I mean, and talent, obviously everything is getting a little bit more muddled, where you see people crossing over both behind the camera and in front of the camera between the two mediums. But from viewing it from the lens, given the audience here, which is from sort of more of a financing standpoint, the trick about episodic, and at least, assuming you're not making these in your backyard, is it's a lot. There isn't as much of an independent series model per se, although we're seeing that start to emerge a little bit more. It tends to be more the province of the big studios and networks, which are now you can speak to sort of the FinCEN implications of this, but are sort of one and the same now. But on a global basis, there isn't as much the equivalent of sort of the international pre-sale model for series. It exists in a few cases, and we're seeing a couple of new entrants literally in the past couple of weeks emerge to try and do this a little bit more, but even then, it's syndicate groups of partners between like Deutsche Telekom, BT, et cetera, that are doing things on a pretty big scale. Because say you're making a series and it's a 13-episode order, and the deficit on, say it's a $2 to $3 million an episode budget, you're maybe going to get $1 million probably upfront from a handful of networks. So you have a $2 million per ep deficit, which means you have a $25 million shortfall to take a flyer on it. That's like an order of magnitude bigger in terms of the relative equity risk that like a feature investor would usually take. So that's why you don't see a lot of independent episodic content, except at the much smaller level, which is more like the YouTube series, like super, super low budget level.
Do you think the binging behavior of consumers has shifted towards a stronger appeal for series?
I mean, I think so. I don't know what the sort of the chicken and the egg relationship is. I think like what caused what, but I think what we're seeing is with the increase in the quality of episodic content, which is so good, both between the storytelling and just from a technical visual standpoint, people are obviously watching more, and the benefit to platforms like the Amazons and the Netflixes is it's stickier content. Albeit some people are literally binging these things in a day, it does keep people on the platform longer because they have to plow through, particularly if you're multiple seasons, it might take a couple of months to get through a show, and that keeps people coming back and back and back, and then they'll go on to the next one, which is better, whereas a feature is sort of one and done, but that's why the theatrical model, I would argue a little bit with what Sky said kind of at the earlier part of this. I don't think the theatrical model really goes away all that quickly. I think you look at the growth of theaters internationally, particularly in China, and while admissions are flat or declining, we're still talking about a $20 to $30 billion business. That's not going to go away that quickly. It'll take some time. But what that does do is it sets up still a paradigm of all these other media windows, which is this sort of big sloppy mess after the theatrical window. So you've got pay-per-view, TVOD, AVOD, SVOD, traditional pay television and free television, et cetera. Those platforms aren't going away that quickly either. How they time each other and what the economics of them is going to change over time, but there's still a lot of value to be untapped in this sort of feature world if it is a theatrical kind of film. Just what qualifies for theatrical is changing pretty fast.
By the way, I would argue with you that your China example is not a fair example because there's such a poor in-home entertainment series of options available to the Chinese consumer. So, and that's going to change.
Fair enough, but I would make this point, which is the theatrical experience and sort of the traditional 2D, 3D like film as we know it experience of people going to the theater. I think the reason that doesn't go away anytime soon is not so much based on the alternative of what you can watch at home. It's there is sort of still eventized stuff because of these huge tentpole movies that are being made by the studios, and there are certain genres that lend themselves to an audience experience where you are watching it in a group. I mean, this goes back to like, primal theater stuff as humans, which is comedies, horrors, just certain things people enjoy watching in a group, whether it's on stage or on a screen. So I just don't think that's going away, and by comparison, and this is more a little bit of a US paradigm, it is still close to, with the exception of staying at home, the cheapest ticket in town by comparison for your leisure dollar, if you put it in true economist perspective, which is, you know, two people or a family doing something at night compared to going to a concert, a sports game, live theater, et cetera, it's still relatively inexpensive by comparison to your alternative sort of leisure dollar choices.
I was debating whether or not to say this or not. I had no idea we were going to get Alan Horn and Les Moonves all here on the same day, Paul. No, but I think that's a fair. It'd be a great debate, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Where the sky is falling, versus Paul, we're still hanging in there.
There is a hybrid, right? I mean, there is a hybrid in the sense that there's so much, and I don't know if anyone in the room is CAA or William Morris. There's such an
Anybody got a suit on?
There's such an embedded infrastructure around how top actors make money and that food chain that would have to break down on one end, in addition to the other comments. The flip side is, what is a theater? It's a box that's used like 3 days a week, and I think the VR, AR, alternative content, esports, other things that can go into the theater. So when we think about a theater, it will less be I'm going to the 8 o'clock show, or I'm going to the matinee. It'll be more, I did that maybe with my kids for, on Saturday, but on Thursday night I'm doing the esports, virtual reality event with the Korean gamers and whatnot and all that. That's what's going to be kind of the maybe the hybrid utilization between these two.
And we've not touched on live casting today,
right,
which is definitely a big challenge to content. Okay, we got 3 minutes or 3 minutes? Okay. 2 questions. Who's got a question? Did we really get through everybody? Okay. Okay.
Hi guys, thank you so much for being here. My name is Jennifer Julian. My partner and I have a production company called Junebug Pictures. And what I really want to know is if you really are open to being contacted, and if yes, how do we get a hold of you?
I think, I can't remember who said it first, usually the best way is always through a representative that's somewhat qualified. For a host of legal reasons, I'm sure you know, most production companies and studios don't want unsolicited submissions. So yeah, always have an agent, a manager, or a lawyer who's connected in the industry approach. Besides the fact that it'll probably get a read, depending on who that is, it may float higher to the top of the stack, because for most, I don't know what the quantity is at studios. As an independent production company financier, we get between 20 and 30 scripts a week, which means we're, diving through somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 a year. So, you want something that helps, distinguish yourself a little bit.
Any other comments on that? Finished script versus treatment? Any other foot in the door advice? Okay. Last question. Well, good for. Okay. Stand up so old men can hear you.
I can't speak entirely for the exhibitors, but I think part of it is, by historical standards, it was always sort of a slow-moving ship. These are things that some of these businesses have been around 70, 80 years, and their business model was pretty consistent, for a long stretch. It's only been probably until the last, 20 years that things started to get crazy. Either they got over-levered because they expanded too fast, and this is more of a North American paradigm, or as the sort of threat of box office tailing off started to sort of impinge on their business model, that forced them to do other things. So why they're so slow, I think part of it is capital constraint. The other part, though, is these are expensive boxes, albeit, just boxes. And so if you're going to put that kind of money into something, you want to know that there's a sustainability to the model. If to illustrate, if making something that's sort of VR-enabled theater costs X, you got to be pretty confident, A, you're going to have enough content to feed that beast, and B, that the ROI can be justified by how many people are going to use it over time, because that's really what a theater is. It's all about utilization and selling popcorn. So I think part of it is and this, by the way, affects every other part of the ecosystem too, it's not just the theaters, is the lack of predictability and forecastability of value extraction from content is much harder right now than it has been by historical standards. Look at people who did modeling from a financial standpoint at studios or wherever 15, 20 years ago. You knew if box office was X, DVD was 1.1 of X, and you knew your pay television formulaic model based on your P&A spend in the box. You knew free TV was this, and you were within a pretty narrow band of precision, which made it a much more viable asset class. Today, the beta is monstrous, and that makes it a little bit more harrowing. So I'm not going to be an apologist for the theaters, but it's tricky and it's scary given the magnitude of money that they have to put to work, and they've also just come through the tunnel on digitizing the projectors. So it's like, now we got to do this again. I can imagine that's not a popular topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's from an outsider's perspective, you have high fixed costs, it's difficult to innovate from within. The majority of what we see is outside companies and startups trying to partner up and increase the utilization in different ways. Someone alluded to esports earlier. We've seen a number of models that on off hours or could be mornings, could be matinees, could be otherwise, they'll dedicate certain time to different esports, often focused more on the youth market. I think we see things like that coming from the outside. And then just in terms of new experience, it was alluded earlier, like going to the movies, it can be a very social experience. And where you see that going, at least in New York, and I know other markets, are, you turn it into more of a, dinner and a movie where you have theaters like Alamo, where it's more about the experience of being there than it is about just content on a screen. And so, I think you're going to see things like that changing the industry at a high level, but the innovation, a lot of it's going to come from the outside.
How many of you are MoviePass subscribers?
And are
Less
you
than
all
I thought.
happy?
It's a pretty good consumer deal.
Yeah. I'm surprised it's not higher. Okay.
Okay, that was great. I really appreciate everybody's been a nice interactive seminar. That was great. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. That was one of the best panels I've ever been to.
Wow. It's great to see you. Good meeting you.
It's Skylar, right? Oh, yeah, because I got a friend by that name.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Catherine. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Graham, nice to meet you, Tess.
I'll take your card. I don't have a card here. Somewhere off screen.